Okay, and I am Rosy Garcia Valina. Everybody knows me because I am being videotaped. So I am the Technical Assistance Coordinator for Migrant Education and English Language Learners for both the Central and the South Central Comprehensive Centers. So today we are going to be talking about a topic that is really worrying about because there are so many kids that are identified as special needs but who are not, and vice versa. There are a lot of kids that are not being provided services as special needs because they have not been identified appropriately. So today we are trying to, first of all, and you know me, I always go first with the legal considerations because it's not that we want to do it or not, it's just that we need to do it and what we need and which are the laws that will protect these children who are English language learners but at the same time have exceptional needs. And I'm not talking only for those children with disabilities, I will be talking also for those children who qualify for gifted and talented programs. So we're going to be talking how can we identify if those kids have an exceptional need or if it's only a language struggle as they are learning the second language. We are going to have some information about what is the eligibility process and how it differs from the regular students who are English speakers to the ELL students. And then we're in this first part of the morning, we're going to be talking about some guidelines to assess ELL's learning disabilities. So I have given you a handout like this, which is called the knowledge chart. And what I want you to do, it has 3 columns. So, but I would like to see if you can write down what you know about the ELLs with exceptional needs. And what would you like to know? So you leave this 3rd column in blank, but just try to fill out the first one and the second one. Okay, I think everybody's done. So let's go on. So historically, the English language learners have been either underrepresented or overrepresented in programs for special ed. And there is a reason about this. First of all, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act does not require states to report enrollment, participation of these kids as ELL with special needs. You are asked to report number of ELLs, and separately, you are asked to report special needs kids, but they don't put them together. So for many districts and for many states, they don't see the need, so they don't have that data with them. Another thing is that sometimes children are classified as requiring special services, but it's not because they have a learning disability, but because they are struggling in learning English. And because they are so focused in learning English, which for them is the most important thing to succeed in school, they don't care too much about the content. And the third reason is because may not be identified because the teachers have a lack of understanding of what are the stages of language acquisition. So there has a lot of things to do about this, and this is some of the reasons why these kids are not identified. Another reason is because there are very, very limited numbers of ESL teachers who have also the specialty of special ed. So either they are special ed or they are ESL. So to have both content mastery, there are very, very few. So many children where they are identified as an ELL with exceptional needs, people forget about the language support. So, but not anymore. So now what is really, really needing is that we have to go through the law and see what are the requirements that we have to share with our school districts and schools so that they know that these kids are protected by the law. And first of all, okay, we are going to make a short review about these 3 different laws. the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, Title I and Title III, also known as ESEA, and of course the Civil Rights Act. So IDEA, you know, is a federal law, and it was enacted in 1990, and it has been renewed and adjusted throughout the years. The last one that was already in place, it was in 2004, and every time that they renew it or just adjust it, they add more requirements to help those English language learners that are also have disabilities. And one of the things that I underlined there is because in the law it says that we need to provide services in order to prepare them to become independent and be part of the general society. And what I have seen in many, many states and schools is that those kids that are identified in special ed, they live there forever. They are left forever because there is no requirement that says, okay, after such time, you have to look for how are you going to help this child to get out of special ed. And when I was at Texas A&M and I was working with one of the doctoral students who was doing her dissertation on special ed kids, ELL special ed kids, it was really hurting to see that 99% of all the schools that she surveyed didn't do anything, didn't have anything to take out the children from special ed. So the children were there forever and ever. So an idea also, so it's also included now that the assessments and the services have to be linguistically appropriate. So it's not only Title III that is requiring that. IDEA in 2004 inserted that statement as well. In the other hand, we already know that Title I funds, if you are a school and you receive Title I funds, you need to submit a plan, a strategic plan, or a consolidated plan, saying, how am I going to serve these kids? How am I going to serve these ELL students? And how am I going to serve the special ed kids who are also ELLs? So that is now in the law. And of course, Title III, remember, the money from Title III is not to provide the basic services. It's just to enhance the services that should be provided through Title I, but that will allow the child to master the language so they can be part of the general society without any help. And of course, there is a lot of requirements in that, so I'm only putting in here, in general, what it relates to English language learners with special education needs. So, as I said, they have to submit that program, that strategic plan, saying specifically how they are going to be serving those kids. Now, what has research found? I have been working with the ELLs for a long time, and I'm always trying to be updated with research studies. What is research doing about these ELLs? How can we really help? What are the advancements that they have found that are different from the time that I worked on my doctorate and I went much, much in depth to help the English language learners? What is right now up there? And something that I really found that it caught my attention is that there was a national symposium of children with disabilities. And what they found is that in the lower grades, kids, English language learners, are overrepresented because of their language. Because that is the time where they are struggling in learning a new language, and they are overrepresented in the lower grades. But by the time they get to third, then they are identified as having learning disabilities. And when you see this, you might think, okay, well, so what? Well, so what is that when they are young, you are not providing them with the services that will help them to overcome those learning disabilities to catch up with the students. So for the kindergarten, first and second grade, When the children are referred to special ed, most of the time it's because a language impairment, and which is logic because they are learning a second language. But after that, then when they are third, now they are identifying that they also have a learning disability, a reading disability, but it's too late. So that's one of the reasons why many students just have that problem forever and ever, because it's really hard to catch up after losing, if we can call it that way, 3 years of services or interventions where they can overcome their real disability. Does that make sense? So, and please feel free, remember I talk and talk and talk, but please feel free to interrupt anytime you have a question.
So, Rosie, for our ELL students then that may have a disability, so I'm thinking from what you're saying, the major exceptionality that we see these kids have would be a learning disability, right?
Many times, yeah. And as we will see in these studies, a learning disability stays forever. It's nothing that you can say, okay, you have a pill and then it disappears. No. But there are techniques and there are interventions that you can give to the child so that they can overcome that disability. Because the disability, what it is a different reaction in the brain. So we usually, if we are not disabled learning, we don't have a learning disability that I hope I don't have. So I can catch up whatever you tell me because my brain is connected in a way that all the cells will tell me, okay, and you are listening in English, for example, so you don't have to translate. So it's a mechanism. But for a child with a learning disability, there's a shortcut. There's something that is not being connected. So that's why when they receive that information, it might go this way, yeah, but it might go this way. So they cannot be connected with what is going on outside. And that is why it's so important that we make more research, we conduct more research on how we can help these children. Because in looking, I always try to look also in studies that have happened all around the world. Because maybe we are advanced, but maybe someone in Germany or in Denmark have done any other type of research. And I have found that these children with disabilities, I'm not saying all disabilities, but some disabilities can be overcome through specific strategies. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, though, are ed diagnosticians and everybody on that's a part of the team to identify kids, are they trained in this?
That's what we're going to see. That's what we're going to see. Yeah, don't run. We're still walking.
And the answer's
I was going to say the answer. And we would hope there would be slightly better news now than what was available in 2003 because what I'm familiar with in Louisiana, there's a new era of getting in and doing interventions for all students. And people are more aware. I think people know. I don't know that they know what to do, though.
Right. I think research has advanced a lot. And this, even though it is an old study, we can consider an old study, it is the foundation, it is the basis of what's going on. Because, when someone comes up with a different result based on research, it takes a time to be absorbed by the society. It takes time to be accepted by the teacher. But that teacher that has been in special ed for 15, 20 years and said, no, I know my job, I don't have to change. So changes take time.
And that time frame is really when people started looking at this disproportionality research in a lot of areas. So I'm hopeful it's a slightly brighter picture. But
Right. And let me tell you that every year since I have been at the center, I try to put together a regional event, like a convening or like a symposium or something that brings people together and talks about things like this. Well, Let me tell you that a couple of years ago, I tried to put something together for ELLs with exceptional needs. So my first step was to talk to the resource centers, who at that time were still working, and I talked to 5 different resource centers. And I asked them if they think that this would be something that would be of interest to them. Well, guess what? All of them, 100% of those centers said, this is not an issue in special ed. This is not an issue. And I was like, what? What? Yeah, this is not an issue. Nobody cares about that. Say, okay, thank you very much. So we changed it. We changed that from the ELL. That's when we came up with valuing equity and diversity, because that they were really interested on. But for ELLs with the special needs, why should we worry? Nobody will want to go to your symposium or to your event and say, okay, that was an eye-opener. Yeah.
People didn't know what they didn't know.
Exactly, exactly. But you would think that if you're a resource center, at least one of their schools that they serve would have the same worry, but it looked like they didn't. So that's what I was talking about. The kindergarten are those language impairment, and then after 3 years, they're different. So now I'm going to go through many of the facts or the things that impact an English language learners to act in the school, okay? The first thing is that when we come to a school, that English language learner has to face a series of changes that he most of the time is not prepared to. Regardless of the age, if he comes in kindergarten, or if he comes from the outside, from another country, 3rd grade, 5th grade, high school, you name it. There is no preparation for those children of what they are going to find when they go to school. Because the American school system is so different. The philosophy, the expectations are so different. So for many students, for almost, let's say, 99% of the students that start going to an American school, they are just like shocked, say, okay, what's going on in here? It's something completely different from what they are coming from. So then, if those children are coming to the school with limited skills in their native language, that makes it more difficult. So that's something that is happening right now in all the lower grades, because they come to school completely unprepared. Not that they don't want to come and they don't want to learn, they just come to school completely unprepared. They don't have any resource in their minds, in their preparation to act as an American or to be adapted to the American system. And that is a lot of discontrol for them, right? So now, teachers and many counselors, they still believe that because the child is not fluent in English, they are dumb. Well, no. Knowing another language is not a disability. Learning a new language is not a disability, it's a plus. Because how many kids do you find in your system that have already 2 languages, are proficient in 2 languages? How many teachers? How many administrators? Even at the state level, there are very limited number of people who really can say, I am bilingual. So it's easy to think, okay, so if they don't know English, there's nothing we can do. And they either give them some drills to fill out and they place them at the end of the class, of the room, or they just ignore them. And then they get frustrated because the child is not understanding. And the reason is because, okay, les empiezo a hablar en español y entonces algunos de ustedes van a decir, ¿de qué hablas? How did you feel? Are you crazy? What happened? What happened? We're supposed to be learning, talking in English, right? So can you imagine what a child feels when all day long that child is listening to another language that he doesn't understand? What would you do? If you had this meeting, an hour meeting, only 1 hour, let's suppose, and you're listening to a language that you don't understand, how would you feel? Because you're grown-ups, you say, thank you very much, I have other things to do, and we leave the room. right? So the child cannot do that. So the child has to stay there and struggle in trying to understand whatever, and may understand something different. And I have an example. When we were coming in here, we take an Uber. Okay, Uber is not a word that is in my mind because I don't use it very much. As a matter of fact, I never use it. But then the person who was driving asked Carrie if they have too many Ubers in Oklahoma, because they spoke so fast to me. So in my mind, I said, what are they talking about? So what's going on in Oklahoma? Rain. Okay, so I thought it was going to rain. I didn't got that Uber word, and my brain switched it for rain, right, Carrie? So I turned to Carrie and say, haven't you had a lot of rain? Say, what are you talking about? But that's an example of what happens with the brain. Even one word can change all the sense of the things. And that's what happens to the kids.
Does everybody know what she means, Uber?
I don't.
They don't even know what
Exactly.
Americans, that's a new word for Americans.
It's, yeah, Uber, it's like a taxi service.
Ah.
Yeah.
I didn't know
I
what.
thought I was-
But you have to make context clues to even figure out. Is it more like a taxi or more like a?
Yeah, it's like a
No,
taxi.
it's like a taxi. It's a system.
It's a taxi, but it's kind of like having your own private driver. You order an Uber, and they show up and they take you wherever you want to
It's
go.
more exclusive.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but it's cheaper than a taxi. But I'm curious, Rosie, because I was going to ask you in the car, but didn't want to. What was it that you heard? Do you know what you heard that made you translate that to rain?
No, I heard, do you have too many order? Then when he said Uber, I didn't catch that word, and I know what Uber is, but in my mind, I related to my background knowledge, okay, so what's happening in Oklahoma, a lot of rain. So unconsciously, I assumed that they were talking about rain.
Yeah.
So, and
It wasn't
this,
even what you heard. It was
exactly.
just- You were just trying to think back what was going on
Uh-huh.
in Oklahoma.
And that's what happens.
I was in my head, I was wondering, I wonder if she thought he said umbrella. Because I was like, what about Uber? But I was, the way you explained it, just that I think is perfect, that it was an unconscious change. It had nothing to do with the word Uber.
Right.
So when our kids are sitting in class,
Right.
they could go to a whole different
Right.
topic,
Right.
and there be no rational connection between the two.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really
Plus,
interesting.
they might get in trouble for getting off task.
Exactly.
So you living here, you usually don't have the need of a taxi, so you don't use Uber
Right.
system. So it's unfamiliar also for you, right? So, and it was, okay, so, but many times when I present, I try to put me as an example because I have been here for 17 years. I think that my English is not perfect, but it's not that low. I think that I read a lot, I try to study a lot of words, and I try to use words the way you use them, but I have not achieved the level that I would like to. Because sometimes, and many times, the way you structure your sentence is completely different than the way that I would structure them, because I learned English in a different way. So that's why and then I don't offend anybody. I am just putting myself on the spot.
So Rose, I'm just curious, where is the interpreter in all this? Okay, because you stick a kid in the classroom and you're talking English. And of course I can see how that would just blow the kid away. There's no requirement when they're doing the assessment of the child for them to
No.
have an interpreter in the room?
No, oh yeah, there is a requirement, but many people don't have it. And then, as we're going to see here, there is a difference between a translator and an interpreter. And many people think that an interpreter is the best, and it's not. Because most interpreters are not trained in special ed. Most interpreters are not trained in English language English as a second language. So they just learn the languages like a tourist, Uh-huh. And they come to your class and they say, okay, but they interpret, and you don't want that. You need to need translation. And that is very, very important. And that's a difference, completely difference in making the decision of what does this child need.
Well, even on a more basic level, the IDEA forms in the school are not in the parents' native language.
Exactly.
So they don't even understand, the whole process or what they are even being given in terms of what, that even the most basic thing the parent
And
also
even-
does.
and
We
even if
do
they-
have them on the website now, they're in different languages, the whole entire,
Oh, great.
exception, the procedural safeguards.
Great. So we need to let our districts
So
know.
all of them, yeah, they're listed.
Great.
And it-
But,
Hopefully we can do the same for the other.
but let me tell you, most of the times they are translated by machines.
Right.
And you cannot translate a language through the computer.
Right.
You can translate a word,
And you and
but you
I,
cannot translate a language.
and you and I would walk in and get a full discussion about it.
Right.
In our native language, so, we have it in our native language in print, we have the opportunity to converse and ask questions, and still, the machine translated paperwork is, gonna have some hiccups, and then you may or may not have, a skilled interpreter.
But ours is not machine. We actually have a company
Okay.
that we
Okay,
contact. We didn't do a machine.
Anymore.
But even with that translated document, how many of us would read an IDEA parent book and be able to really understand what that means for our child, right? And so like you said,
In a session with people watching.
That-
Here's
right.
the right book.
so that conversation
They really
is really
took,
important.
when they revised the latest version of this handbook, they made it very parent-friendly. They broke
Good.
down the language. They spoke to it. It wasn't written in our typical IDEA lingo. It was really written as, this is what this means for your child. This is what, these are the type of questions you could ask. It was very parent-friendly, and they really took that into consideration when they developed it, maybe a couple of years ago.
It was
and then
Corey
we-
did that.
Right.
Okay, but it's going to get better, don't worry. You're going to be more confused. Okay, another thing that happens is that most assessments have been designed for American English-speaking students. And the field tests are given to the American English-speaking children, who has nothing to do with those English language learners who come from a different culture, from a different perspective. So for many teachers, okay, he didn't do well in the standardized test. He is just either dumb or he has to be retained, instead of looking what happened in that kid that came to this point. Another thing that happens is that sometimes they are identified in categories because of the language. But then you have to review what type of language support program do they have, okay? Maybe they are in 4th grade or in 5th grade or in high school. Well, what happens in those grades are the ESL pull-out program, and I'm going to present it to you as I have seen it in many, many, many schools. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. I am the ESL teacher. Okay, I have to pick up my beginners. Okay, and I have 2 in kindergarten, 3 in 1st grade, and 4 in 2nd grade. But 2nd grade, they are split in 2 classes. So here I go, 10 o'clock, this is my period, this is already my time. So I go to 1st grade, and I pick up those kids, and I go to kindergarten, and the teacher says, okay, yeah, they are just about to finish the activity. So you lose 5 minutes, and then you go to 2nd grade to one classroom and then to the other. So when you have your 10 kids together, then you go to your space, to your classroom, to your place, and in the way, they go by the restroom. I need to go to the restroom. Okay, and with kids, one goes, all the 10 go, right? So by the time they get to the ESL class, they have lost 20 minutes. So they start their classroom assuming that they already have everything in place, the teacher has everything in place for the class of that day. She has only 10 minutes to provide class to those children who are beginners, who are really, really struggling with the language, and then, okay, you have to take them back. And you have to take them back to second grade, to the other classroom, to. What did they learn? Nothing. Now let's see in high school. They don't have to pick up their children, but they have study skills class with a ESL teacher. Okay, so here comes Marie with a history assignment, and then John with an algebra assignment, and then Juanito with a geography assignment, and they all come here with you, and they come here and say, oh, please, Miss White, can you help me because I need to complete my assignment? So Miss White, who is an ESL teacher, doesn't have the time to teach them skills that will help the kids to understand even if they don't have the whole language, because they have, oh, please, 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 really, really? And they are asking questions all the time. So again, they don't have the opportunity to teach skills because they become the translators. And the kids love to go there because they can interact with one another, but that doesn't mean that they are learning, because they are losing time at the room, they are losing the teacher's time, the ESL teacher's time, because they are not advancing in the skills they need. So that is why it's so important that we understand all the spectrum, all the view, all the setting, not only think, okay, because Juanito is not learning the sounds, it's a disabled, so I have to refer him to special ed. So there's a lot of things that are happening. And additional factors, we can say, of course, the level of adaptive behavior that the child has, if he is really happy to be here, and if he's really happy to be in an American school. You might think, okay, because this is the American dream, everybody's happy here in the United States. Well, go to the classrooms and ask the kids if they are happy or if they are not. So the time spent in the United States, of course, the cultural home setting, because we have, and I can tell you because I have a lot of, all my kids, and I mentioned that before, all my kids are bilingual teachers in different levels. So I have my daughter telling me the other day, oh, you know, Pamela, she was crying all day because her dad was deported. And then the other guy, he was confused because he was taken to a foster parent, different from where he was. So all those things that are happening in the lives of those children have to be considered before you think, okay, I want to send him to special ed. Social and emotional maturity, the level of proficiency in both languages, mobility, what happens with the migrant students. And I think I have mentioned that before. There is this kid that was in second grade in Texas, then they moved to Montana, they was put in third grade, then to Wisconsin was put in first grade, and then he came back to Texas in second grade, in the same school year. Do you think that child was able to learn something? I don't think so. So, sociocultural development and motivation. So there's a lot of factors that are impacting that child. Okay, so it is very important that we check that the second language support program is high quality and it is effective. And one of the reasons why we're trying to train all those teachers at the Teacher Summit as becoming language coaches to work with the content teachers is because of what I mentioned. They don't have the time to provide high quality language support. And then you have many times limited family support. Why? Not because they don't love the kid, because they don't know how can they help their kids. Or you are
I see many teachers telling the parents, read to your child every day at least 20 minutes. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. That person is having 2 shifts at the plant processor, the meat processor. They come to their homes at 6, 7 o'clock, and the mother has to prepare the food for the kid. Do you really think that that mother has the time, the strength to sit down with the kid for 20 minutes and read when she doesn't even read? So we have to understand all those things. And that is why it's so important that the teachers establish that relationship with their students. So otherwise, it's just, I am trying to change this table, this chair, because this is a better look for that, so I'm going to try to change this chair. But I'm not a magician, and I'm not an illusionist, so I have to work what can I do to transform that chair into one of these? And that's what happens with our kids. Okay, so these are some individualities that are usually an aspect that you can observe to start the idea that might have a learning disability. Okay, sometimes the child has a history of having limited difficulty in their first language. They spoke too late. They started speaking too late. However, I'm only going to tell you this. If a child comes from let's say, Hispanic, because I have to say I am Hispanic, I'm the one that I have the experience in that. My grandchildren, I have 7. 2 of them were born in Mexico and started speaking in Spanish all the time. When they were 3, they came to the United States, and in the pre-K and K, all the time, even though they were in a bilingual classroom, they were not given any native language instruction. The bilingual program in that setting was that I will use Spanish for whatever he needs to understand. So only as, okay, you didn't understand this? This is blah, blah, blah. They would start saying in Spanish, and that was their bilingual program. Okay, so, but they started speaking when they were 8 months, 9 months, regular words, and they had a good, more or less, a level conversation when they were 3. The rest of them, they were born in here. And even though we all the time we talked to them in Spanish, they delayed in speaking, starting speaking. They started pronouncing words, sense words, when they were 18 months rather than 8 months. So 10 months later. And they were confused. So, but it took them about 6 months, and then they're starting pronouncing or giving utterances in English and utterances in Spanish. And they knew when do they use English and when they use Spanish. So I kept a record, because I like research, of what were the words that they started and at what time. And it was interesting to see that even though there was that span of time, that length of time where they didn't talk anything, and we were worried with the first one saying, he's mute, he's not going to talk anything. And then all of a sudden he started talking in both languages. So yeah, it's an interesting factor that women may not think about it. So, but if there is a family history of reading difficulties, if the siblings have had reading difficulties, that might be part of the genes of the family. So this is one of the factors that you may want to see. So, and then that is the important part, that you have to go to both languages. So what I did in here is, okay, now I am a teacher, and I'm going to try to see if that child is eligible for services. Before I have the pre-referral, I have to show that I have this data that will help you, the special ed or the counselor, to go further with a pre-referral. So for English-speaking students, for all the students, gather information from education and school background, from your family and the personal facts. records, observation, and teacher reports. That's for everybody. Now, additionally, for ELLs, okay, determine the level of proficiency in language and literacy in the student's first and second language, which might be included when you decide on when you identify the level, the time in the USS, the time in the ESL program towards the second language, and the social and cultural background and culture of the family. So these are additional things that teachers have to do to make sure that they are in the correct path. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, so then, you as the English speakers, again, I put it in 2 columns because this is for everybody. Okay, the students, the teacher has to analyze that information and of course try to identify if he is hearing impaired or sight impaired, so medical things, or if he has behavior problems, emotional problems, just because now he is living with a foster family rather than with his family, or his dad or mom was taken away. So a lot of things are happening, and then the social patterns. So you can evaluate the development of the children if that is intellectual or if it's also psychological. So all those things you have to do with every child. So by the time that the child is referred to the counselors to make those psychological, to administer those psychological testing and those other more in-depth studies, you have, as a teacher, you need to know this. Mm-hmm. Now, for the English language learners, and it's here what you said, Bernal, you have to include a language specialist, and as much as possible, a person from the child's culture, because otherwise you might misinterpret what is happening in the life of that child, to ensure that you are analyzing without any bias. Also, you have to compare with results with another ELL who has a similar characteristics. That is one of the things that is very pivotal, is very important, because that's when you have a reference say, okay, Carrie has been using the Uber and Carol has been using the Uber, now I'm going to compare what they think about it. So the more that you can compare with someone that is in the same, more or less, of course, you are not going to find 2 kids that are identical. Yes?
How would they do that? I mean, what would be the,
Observations.
but like, is there data? I mean, wonder if this is the only ELL child, you know.
There should be another one or another. Well, of course, it is difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. But in most cases, you have ELLs that are in the same school. It's very rare that you have one ELL in the whole school. And it doesn't matter if that other ELL is in 4th grade or in 3rd grade, because what you are going to see is the reaction towards culture, towards behavior, towards acceptance. Because all of this is the complete package. It's not only the reading assessment, it's not only the writing assessment, it's the observations. And observations have a very, very important role, because the teacher is with them all the time. So the teacher can see if maybe Juanito today is throwing tantrums, and then the next day he's the nicest guy in the class, and then once again the next week. So the teacher has to contact the parents and say, what's going on? Because something additionally to his struggling in learning the language, more likely he's going to have another emotional factors that are impacting his learning.
And like with the language specialist, at which point in the process should that be done? Should they bring in someone? And is it someone, because I know I've absolutely just 2 weeks ago, the district, and they didn't have, the child spoke Urdu, or speaks Urdu, and they just did not have an Urdu speaker other than the parents.
Right.
And so they were going to bring in, it was all going to be done by home, which they recognized was not. But they were wondering at which point do we bring in the specialist?
I
Or
think-
just find somebody from their native.
Right. I think that it all depends on the child. And one of the things that I have always recommended is that the schools need to establish partnerships with the community. If the school wants to work on their own, this school is missing a lot of resources. If you work with the community, and if you make partnerships, you establish partnerships with the community, churches, community services, Catholic charities, all those nonprofit organizations are always willing, and they have a lot of people from different cultures. So if a teacher notes that, I think it would be convenient, and I would recommend her, okay, why don't you talk with someone from their culture? I usually don't recommend to talk first with the parents, and you're going to see why. But in reality, it is very important to have the perspective from a culture, from a person from the same culture. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And then because for the teacher, it is overwhelming. And I can understand, because you have 20 kids in your class, and then you have 2 or 3 that are not making any progress, and you are desperate because you don't have the time to talk to the parents, you don't have the time to sit with them. You can make your small groups and provide them instruction face-to-face, but still there is not. And this afternoon, could we talk about RTI? That's a good solution for all these cases. Because RTI, that's what RTI is about. You start teaching everybody, then you isolate the children who are not doing at the level that you want, then you have your small groups. And then in your small groups, then you teach them, okay, this group is low in phonemic awareness, or in writing, or in whatever, and then you work with them. But still, in that small group, you are going to find children who are not progressing, who are not making any progress. That's when you go to this part. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we're going to be overlooked this afternoon when we go to the RTI.
So Rosa, where is this requirement? Is this in ELL statute or for the assessment of the?
Okay. The way that I set this up is because many times the teachers just throw the say, come with a special ed teacher or with a counselor, say, well, Juanito is not making progress, so here it is. And the poor counselor receiving that from Juanito, from Predicto, from Maria, from 15 different children, they don't have the time or they don't have the resources. So, and I believe that the teacher has more knowledge about the child rather than the counselor or the interventionist, or however you want to call that person, because the teacher is with them in different settings. So when the teacher provides all this data and all this information before to start the pre-referral process, then you will see that those counselors have a lot of information to work with, and they can decide. Because this doesn't mean that the child has an exceptional need. This is just the things that are recommended for the teachers to gather so they can make the decision. I'm going to send this for refer. I'm going to refer this child for special ed. And you may recall that I believe it was about 3 or 4 years ago, the U.S. Department of Education idea came only that only 1% of your students can be eligible for special ed. Well, that was a little bit exaggerated because maybe you have more. But you have to have a lot of background and a lot of proof that they really need that that special services. Well, now they changed that to 2%, which still I believe it's low. But the reason why they did that, because it was a time that you had 45% of the children in your school being referred to special ed. So people started exaggerating or just sending more and more children to the special ed services, and that's why they started saying, okay, no, that it's not that way. I remember one time when I was in Texas and I was working with some teacher assistants in San Diego, which is not San Diego, California, San Diego, Texas, which is a small town, and that lady was telling me, she had 19 students at the same time. And I was telling, how are you helping them? Of course I can. Of course you can. special ed intervention is you have two the most, and it's too much if you really want to help that child. So that's why IDEA has been reformed.
I guess what I'm asking, for example, in 1508, that first column there, I think that's our pupil appraisal, that's in there. Where is it in statute that tells a district or a school that they have to include a language specialist for the ELL kid that you are assessing? I mean, is that in statute somewhere?
Well, remember when we
Yeah,
came back to the
I
first
remember.
one, IDEA is mentioning about linguistically different students that they have been identified with a special, that in order for them to be eligible for special services, they have to have that linguistic part assessed. And then you have Title I, which also talks about linguistically and culturally diverse students, and of course you have Title III. So these are the three, and of course you have civil rights, but at least these three laws are very specific. So even though they are not required to report them, now that is in the paper. Now it's being studied to have a new IDEA adjustment, so to make a requirement that schools, districts, and states report the number of ELLs who are also eligible for special.
But Rosie, is this a best practice or is it actual requirement?
This is best practice, and it can be included as part of the requirement. Because if you analyze that, it comes into Title III and IDEA. But of course, this is best practice. I cannot say that that is written in the law.
This is all like the what you would do in determining
Exactly.
whether or not you're actually
Exactly.
going to refer a child.
Exactly.
But I guess
The requirement is you can't classify them if it's a language issue. So this helps rule out whether it's a language
Right.
issue. So it's one way of meeting that requirement.
So I guess, Kay, what I'm really asking is if 1508 doesn't address this at all, should this be considered as an edit? Or would this have, or we're gonna wait as a state for the feds to push this to make sure that this is the protocol for assessing whether or not an ELL kid needs services, special educational services?
But I think it goes back to Rosie's point where she said in IDEA, it has that stipulation that you have to look at the student's cultural and linguistic background. Like that's the federal, that trumps everything.
Right.
Like, you just can't say, oh, the student is struggling and not consider whether or not the student doesn't have a learning disability, but he doesn't understand the English language.
And this would be the how-to of
This
it.
would be the
Exactly.
best practice to how to go about determining if this is an academic issue based off of a language barrier.
Okay.
I think some really informal things have been done to rule that out in the past, and I think districts in the state of Louisiana would be really interested in knowing how to put some articulated steps in place.
Right.
Do
I
we
think-
provide districts with guidelines on this is specific guidelines of this is how you work if the child is on ELL?
I have my 1508 in the car.
Because I know that.
Pretty hard.
Oh, true.
I'll look at it tonight.
Right, but I don't think.
I don't think it's strongly articulated. I think sometimes parents have even been interview sources, and I have seen districts that will pull in natural Spanish speakers. Some of them happen to be staff. You know, like we may have in a district a speech language therapist that does a lot of screening, and they'll come and sit with, you know, during the typical screening activities, but that's not standard yet. You know.
Right. Yeah, and as Bernal said, these are best practices, and these will take you to be in compliance with the law. And one of the things that I believe that we have to establish with our school districts and schools is that it's not only being in compliance, it's just a little bit further, because we are educators, because we love kids, and we really want to help them. And because eventually, if I don't help this kid, in 10 years, this kid more likely is going to be part of a gang. More likely is going to be dropping out of school, or more likely is not going to be an active member of the society. So I have to deal with this now that it is the time. And then, while at the same time I'm in compliance with the law, I am making my life easier. So I'm not going to say that because I see in some schools that the teacher sent a long list of children that they want to be referred, and of course, it takes forever. So I've seen children that were referred in kindergarten and they start receiving services when they were in 4th grade because they didn't have that information. So for the teacher, it is easier to have to compile all this information than it is for the counselor. And it's just like when you come here and say, okay, this is what we're going to be talking about, and these are the elements, blah, 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 blah. Then you can come up with decisions. But if you don't have anything, you have to start from scratch. And we were talking about that a while ago when we were talking about migrant. Okay, schools need to have like a checklist. What do I need to have in here so that I do really well with my migrant students, regardless of being or not being in compliance? Because doing well with the migrant students automatically put me in compliance with the law. But it doesn't happen if I go the way around. Does that make sense? So that's why I try to put it in both. So in here you have, okay, so for the English-speaking students, you are at the stage where you can delineate if there is a disability or not. And then you can recommend. Okay, now I'm in the step of recommending this guy to be part of the referral program, just that eventually he has more specificness. But in the meantime, I have, as a teacher, I have done a lot of work. I have done a lot of observations and see what worked for that guy, what didn't work, so I can be sure that what I am saying is because I have the backup of my observation, right? And then again, okay, you have that for all the children, but then additionally, we recommend that the child struggle is not because of the process of language acquisition. That's why it's so important to have a language specialist in part of that. Unfortunately, we don't have so many anywhere. So this is a problem nationwide. Even in Texas, where we do have so many bilingual people, we still don't have bilingual special ed specialists, enough to serve all the kids. And that same thing happens in California, and that same thing happens in Florida, and that same thing happens in New York. So each state is putting a lot of effort. So New York, what they're doing, they are taking their teachers to go through language acquisition courses so that they learn what to expect at the different levels. And they are doing a lot of work with the universities so that they can be prepared. So by the time those teachers graduate from the university, they already have at least the foundation. Okay. So another thing that we need to consider once we have all that information to make that child eligible for services is that, and this is in the law, assessment should be given in the student's strongest language. Strongest language, and I want to clarify that many times their native language is not the strongest language. For many students, unfortunately, they are losing their first language. So we have to give them in the strongest language. So we have to know the level of proficiency between English and the level of proficiency in their native language. Why? Not because we want to assess the level of both, but only to get information about where they're at, because, again, I always try to use some analogies, and native language is here, and second language in here, and you can have all third languages. So native language is the foundation of the house. It might be completed, it might not. Maybe I didn't have enough time to teach my child my native language, so I only set foundations for half of the house. The other part of the house has no foundation. Then they come to get started in a second language, which is going to build over the foundations. Well, what's going to happen? That part that has foundation will grow steadily and correctly and appropriately, while the other part is not going to have any foundation. It's going to crumble. It's going to fall apart. It's not going to stay with the child. And that's something that we're looking in our children.
What's an example of that?
Excuse me?
What's an example of that?
Okay, say for example that I have a child that comes to the school from a Hispanic family, and they can articulate some words. But because the Hispanic culture is not a communicative culture, doesn't have too much dialogue with the kids, we are a culture that I call them the finger culture. We only give orders. Wake up, hurry, take your breakfast, go to school. Leave them in school, behave. They go out from school, how did you behave? What did you learn? And it doesn't matter what the child says, nothing, it doesn't matter. But you already asked, you're a parent. Now, go to wash your hands, sit down, have your dinner, wash your hands, go to make your homework. That is the conversation in our families.
Right.
So that conversation is what they have.
Okay.
When they come to school and the teacher is showing, well, today we're going to learn the color red. What can we see about the color red? And then everybody is making comments, is participating. This young child is just quiet because he doesn't have that knowledge. Because their parents never taught them, okay, look, this is red and this is blue. So that child has to learn the concept plus the language. But because he doesn't have any background, more likely he's not going to hold in his head that new language and, of course, that new concept. And I'm talking about kinder. Now let's go to fourth grade. Okay, fourth grade, the teacher is going to come and talk about multiplication, about divisions, about fractions. They have never heard that. So they have to struggle with the language and with the concept. While if they knew, if he comes from a school, from a Hispanic school where they already learned that in their native language, he will just make the transfer to the second language of the vocabulary. But the concept is already there. So that's why research has found that the more proficient the child is in their native language, the faster they're going to turn into the second language. Does that answer?
Yes, and I think you mentioned it on one of your webinars, and that's the problem that we have with a lot of our older ELL kids who do not have a foundation in their native language. I think you said something along the lines, it's almost impossible at that point
Exactly.
to try to, get them proficient.
Exactly.
Well, I know in adult ed, there was a huge shift of like for the older, and some of whom are, only 18. And when you had a student who did not have any written foundation, any grammatical form, the only thing that they had was native, when it was spoken of their native language, that actually they started teaching them their native language.
Exactly.
They didn't even try to teach them English until they had at least some basic concept
Exactly.
of grammatical structures and stuff like that. So,
Right.
yeah, it's just
I was working with Carthage School District about 4 years ago, but I worked with them for 5 years. And one of the things that we noticed was that the children in third grade, you can listen them to how they could read, fluent, perfect pronunciation, no accent whatsoever, but no comprehensive whatsoever.
Right, exactly. You can read the words.
Yeah, they can read, but they don't
Yeah, the
understand.
vocabulary.
So, and then we came up with the idea, say, okay, what don't we do this? So we established what they call the Sabatinos, and the parents were invited only to talk to their children. So we will give them, okay, you're going to teach them how to make tortillas, And you're going to teach them how is spring in your native land. And you're going to talk to them about different topics. But because there was someone bilingual in there who was pushing the parents to talk, guess what? The comprehension improved. The comprehension in the reading test improved for those kids. And they even have better scores than the mainstream students, only because they were talking to their parents. As easy as that. But we have to be very careful about that and not get confused. So, you tell me if you want a break, because I never stop.
What's a good place on your PowerPoint to break anywhere? Or?
Excuse me?
What's a good place on your PowerPoint to break?
Okay, so it's going to come up? I believe so.
Okay.
I hope so. Okay, so this is an idea. This is included in idea. So this is a requirement. Assessment should be given in the student's strongest language. The student proficiency level has not to be part as the decision making. And then the content and task used in the assessment should be culturally appropriate for the student. Okay? So now you have all that information. You are the teacher. And it is important to remind the teachers, this is their part. This is their role. It's not as easy as just writing the name and giving it to the counselor. Because now the counselors are being blamed because of not providing services to the students, but because they don't have that, right? So, to develop the goals and identify what is the level of services that the child needs, okay, it is based on this, on an appropriate diagnostic or psychological assessment. A committee, and then this is already now, it's not part of the teacher. Now it goes, okay, here I come with all my information, and I leave it to you because you are the counselor, you are the one who's going to be talking, you are the resource teacher. And the teacher and the resource teacher is going to take into consideration everything that you are giving them as a teacher because you will have that information. And you have, I sent you this PowerPoint. Did I send it to you? That's what I was wondering. I believe I sent it. I'm awful ugly.
I'll send it right now.
Yeah. To everybody, please.
Yeah.
Because I see that you're...
You're asking, I was gonna go look for, I can remember.
I don't think.
I hope I didn't overlook it, because that's possible as well.
It's possible.
And this is something that it's an eye-opener. Okay, in many cultures, and I'm talking especially in the Asian cultures, and in the African cultures, and sometimes in the rural areas of Latin America, having a child with a disability, it's a dishonor for the family. And because the male thing, el machismo, what we call it, they blame the lady, the wife, because she must have done something wrong in her life, and that's why the life is punishing them with that child with a disability. So the reaction is not, wow, I'm so glad that you're going to help me. No, I don't want to even go to school and tell them that I recognize that the child has a disability. So what they do, they deny it. Oh, no, you must be wrong because in the house, he's a perfect child. He is a normal child, he communicates, he does this and he even reads very well at home, but he's not reading in school. Well, it must be something else because they don't accept that. And it's not only the denial. Sometimes it's so strong, that feeling, that they just block themselves. And so when the counselor comes and she has to have the signature of the parents to provide or to administer those assessments to the child, they decline.
Also, they don't even get to be referred.
Or even worse, they punish the child.
Oh, yeah, they punish the child. And I have seen children that come out in tears from the classroom because my dad is going to hit me because I cannot read.
Right.
Or with every homework assignment.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So
Can we do this here?
Yeah, can we do this?
that is why it is important also to learn a little bit about the culture of your students. And then try to talk to the parents in a way to convince them that this has happened everywhere, that can happen to everybody, that has nothing to do with punishment, with bad behaviors, nothing like that, and that there is this wonderful service that I can provide your child to overcome those difficulties. And that, let me tell you, it is very, very hard. It is hard because for the teacher to understand that, it's not easy.
Right.
Because in your mindset, you have already said, are you crazy? What's going on in here?
And you know, and Rosa, I mean, just as you've been doing webinars and even today, you know, this is just not limited to our non-English speaking parents. Just the whole stigma of having your child identified with an exceptionality in many cases, I mean, it's just a problem. So I guess what my question is, so is it so much them signing the paper saying that there's possibly some kind of way the paper indicates something is wrong with their child, as opposed to, you know, we're trying to make sure that your kid receives all the supports and interventions needed to progress here in our school. So the parents are able to distinguish between the two? Oh, go ahead, okay.
But I was gonna say, thinking about when I was a teacher, if a parent doesn't want to accept the fact that the student has a disability, it doesn't matter if I'm approaching it saying, I'm here to help you, I'm here to provide services so that the student can speak better, understand better. Sometimes it doesn't even matter if they're not at that point of accepting it.
Right.
If they're at that point of denial, it's just kind of like, I don't care what services the school has to provide. because
I'm not going to identify my
Right.
kid.
You're not gonna do something different for my child than
That
you
you
are
don't
for
get
everybody
right.
else.
Well, and some of them even don't like the fact that they've been identified as a limited English proficient.
Right.
Right? So, you know, so you're right, and there's not much you can do to overcome that, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
But they'll do gifted.
But it goes back to the trust
Because that's the
relationship.
difference.
I know, but I'm
Yeah.
saying it's an identification.
Yeah,
They'll do gifted and talented.
but that's different. It's a
Yeah,
different
right.
perception.
That's
That's
what I'm
saying-
saying.
That says something good.
You're not saying they need something,
Yeah.
this is an extra
Yeah.
enrichment opportunity.
Yeah.
It is sold differently, you could
Yeah.
tell on the head.
Yeah, you're right.
Because I mean, just being honest, I mean, with my own,
We've got something for
yeah,
you.
own experiences with special education, I didn't really have a clear understanding of what it meant to have your kid identified and the different exceptionalities and what all that meant, to be honest with you, until I got here at the agency and I started working with special ed. You know, because the community that I came from, I mean, God knows, it went from one end of the spectrum to the other. One wanted the kid identified for financial reasons, which was totally ludicrous. And then to the other end of the spectrum, okay, no, we don't even want our kid that label on at all. You see what I'm saying? And so, I mean, it goes back to, I think Denise just said it, how do you establish those relationships, you know, with your parents? And it ties to understanding the culture.
Right, exactly.
And-
Well, and as Rosie said, when we start talking about RTI later, I think that really helps provide some of those services without having to put the
Right.
label, right?
Right.
Right.
So even if you find that the child needs more intensive services than you're able to provide through RTI, if the parents refuse, you can perhaps provide those
Be creative,
services
yeah.
without the
Yeah, the label.
labeling.
And this is another reason why we need to make our schools culturally
Right.
accepting, embracing culture, embracing diversity, because this is a result that the parents don't feel comfortable in going to school. But if the teacher or if the school, and it's just, you don't need to do many things. It's just by writing on the board at the entrance, welcome in different languages. Just by instilling in their child, in every student, you don't make laugh of their language, you don't make laugh of their dressing, everybody's everybody. And I believe that's something that we need to go with if we really want to make a difference in our schools. Because more and more we are receiving more people who are from different cultures. So it is going to come to the point that Anglos are going to be the minority. That happens in many sites in Texas. One of the districts where my children work, they are 79% Hispanic, 12 African American, 5 American Indian. What percentage was left for the white Anglos? 3%. Mm-hmm. That's in Irving, Texas. Irving, yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it a school or a district?
In the school district,
In the school district?
at the level of the school district.
Oh,
Uh-huh. And if you go to California,
yeah.
Don't find that here.
New York, New Jersey, and more, South Carolina, their numbers have grown so much with English language learners, children coming from different cultures. So, the evaluation reports should reflect that the observations and that the impact that the language and the culture has in the behavior of the child. So I always recommend that they have to present these documents to the parents in a way that they understand how important it is, that it is a plus. It's not a less, it's a plus that your child is having this opportunity to receive more and more services. And always it is recommended to present the reports to the counselor in a narrative form, because in the narrative form you can explain more than the numbers. The numbers, they don't say that much, right? So, and I think it's not in here, huh? Believe me. I would like for you to go back to your knowledge chart and see if some of your concerns have been answered already so far about what we have seen, and if there is something else. We are going to be talking about a little bit more about other issues, but related to the special ed. But if you want to make any questions about your concerns that you wanted to learn in your knowledge chart and that we have not seen, and then I will tell you if we're going to go through that in the afternoon, or I can answer if I can, I'll do my best. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes so that you can go over them. So far, so good? Okay. So we have also, because the spectrum of children with specific needs, with exceptional needs, goes from that child with a special disability to the child who is gifted and talented. And in the child who is gifted and talented, we also have another category, because we can have a child who is gifted and talented in one area, but who also has a disability. So, and that's something that is happening sometimes because, again, we don't have enough people prepared to provide support language programs in the area of gifted and talented. So once the child is identified as a GT, many times he's taken out of the language support program. Now you're a GT, and then he starts failing, well, because he still doesn't master the language. But that's something that we need to consider. So even though it's a small percentage, still the law is covering them. So we still need to provide a language support program. And this is something that we need to come up with over and over and over, because many people believe that children can learn a second language in 6 months or in 1 year, which that doesn't happen. The average of a person learning a second language to the level of proficiency needed to be in a mainstream class, it takes 7 to 8 years of continuous support and nurturing both the first and the second language. Unfortunately, that is not happening in our schools. So in most cases, we are just offering ESL pull-out classes, or in sometimes even the dual language programs are not 100% dual language programs. So they have bilingual education, early transition, so by the time the children are in second grade, they are taken out of the program and they are not providing any more language support. So, and another thing that happens with the GT is that for us, GT is a concept that we have certain rules and we give them certain assessments, and if they are related with creativity, are related with IQ, but in other countries, in other cultures, gifted and talented doesn't go like that. For example, for an Indian child, a child born in India, that culture appreciates being observant. And if they are good observers and they have that assessment that qualifies them as a gifted because they are good observers. In the Asian culture, another factor of giftedness is memory. So you can have students from Taiwan, Chinese, Japan, that for them, having a good memory, it's a talent. And for us, it's not, because we go more through thinking skills, high-order thinking skills, rather than memorizing. For a long time, it was memorizing, but not anymore. But I can tell you that there are many students, even at the college level, that for them, memorizing is a plus, is something that they need to have if they want to be part and be successful at the college level. So there are some things that we need, and that's why, again, it's so important that we learn about other culture. So for a child, and I met a child that she was a Muslim, and she said, well, I really don't like the American schools because in here, they don't appreciate what I know. And why? Why do you say that? Well, because I memorize everything, and I can tell you whatever is in the book, word by word, but that doesn't matter in here. It doesn't matter in anywhere. And I have another student that he was asked to come to the blackboard and solve an equation. So she came to the blackboard, she was thinking, and she just came up with the answer. But he was not able to put all the process. And because they give them keys, special clues that they have to remember to come up with a correct answer. So you might be surprised when these students answer the TOEFL or the GED. Well, they come with wonderful scores because they memorize and they understand what is the process, which I was like, wow. What is more valuable to see the process, and they could say, okay, you just give me any question that you have and the 4 options in multiple choice assessments. And I show them some of them that are given to the teachers to be certified. And they said, And they were just looking at that, thinking, and then marking the answer, and marking the answer. So I gave them the same questions immediately after, but I didn't put the options. So I tell, okay, you can write me the answers, you already know, because all the answers were correct. Well, no, I cannot do that. So they have certain clues but that is their culture, that is the way they are educated. And to me, it was surprising that we make them to think, and the children to infer, to think what is going on, while in their countries, memory or identifying clues is something important. So we already went that. Okay, so now you have all the materials that the teacher gave you, and they go to the counselor or to the resource teacher, whatever the system is implemented in that school.
Rosie, can I ask you something about the proficiency in their native language?
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, we don't have any such instrument.
Well,
So would they just use,
Elda?
well, ELL is only English, right? So I don't know how they would evaluate a child's proficiency in their native language.
Okay. Remember that I sent you a list of instruments? And I think that, of course, this is in a perfect world, right? So this is what, right, because in California they have that, and in many states they already have that. And I think, how can I say, it's called, well, in Texas they have TELPAS, but they have something in California. There are some instruments that they measure their level of proficiency in the 4 areas in their native language. Mm-hmm. So this is something that usually the counselors or the resource teachers need to start the pre-referral process. Because that doesn't mean once you have, as a teacher, you have all these things, all these documents, that doesn't mean that the child is going to be receiving services the day after you give that to the counselor. It has to be a long process. What you did as a teacher is you advance in collecting the data that will serve them as a basis to go on with the process. And I believe that's the way that is happening in many of the states because of that regulation that only 1% or only 2% was allowed to be reported as special aid. So, and this is a suggested checklist. It's just I put it together based on what is going on in different states. Of course, the personal experiences of the child, like a narrative, his academic history, his level of proficiency and literacy that, as Melanie mentioned, sometimes you don't have that assessment with you. But you want to make sure that the language factor is not what is driving you to identify child with special needs. And then, of course, the same thing with the culture. Because for the culture, there are also very significant factors that might impact the conduct of the child in the new setting. So, okay, so does the child require an assessment in their native language? So what informal tools can be useful to support the child's evaluation? So what are the things that I am a resource person, I am the counselor, so I want to go on with the referral process for this child. What do I want to look at? And when I was saying about the difference between translator and interpreter, is because in special ed, you need to have a translator. You don't need to have an interpreter, which is completely different, because if you say something in English, you want the person who is attending to have the exact same message. So if you are saying that your child is having low scores in math, you want that person to say it in the other language, the same message, right? Well, many times what happens is because, and I'm going to say in Spanish, and I have seen that, lo que pasa es que su niña tiene malas calificaciones en matemáticas, pero puede ser por esto. So they give their own ideas. They are not special people, right? So you have to be careful that when you hire or when you select someone that can be the translator in your meetings, in your IP meetings, you have to have a translator, not an interpreter, because it's completely different, and they can change the idea of the message that you want to convey to the parents. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So And then there are some books, and I think that there's a program where you can train the translator with the terms, because that's something that is difficult for the translator. If they are not trained in special ed, they don't have the terms that you use, like IPA, like RTI. And in this country where you use so many acronyms, then you have to have that training. So there is a training, it's a PowerPoint that we developed some time ago, and with the language, with the terms. So I can provide it to you if you wish, so you can use it if you think it might be helpful, right? Okay, so, and then as a resource person, you need to know who is going to be part of the meeting, right? So you always want to have to put in place a committee, because we already know that with English language learners, you have to support the language, the language program. So you want to work with a ESL teacher, with a bilingual teacher in the school, so that she can give you her idea of what to do or in what language or how is she going to combine your IP with what she can do to support the progress of the language acquisition in the child. Mm-hmm. And then you have to decide who is going to be a part of the team. Now, how can you ensure that the parents are going to be understanding and are knowledgeable and part of the decision making? After lunch, we're going to go through some ideas and some examples that I have put together of what you can do to work with the parents, and some cultural specifics that can give you an idea of the things that you may encounter when you are working with the parents, so that you are prepared and say, okay, I know that. Mm-hmm. So how are they going to be involved? And who is going to monitor the progress? The language person or the special education person, or combined? Because you have to demonstrate that with the IPE that the child is working towards a goal, right? So, but you are also going to specifically specify the goals about language progress. So because he is in a special ed, he's not going to be taken out of the program, of the language program, right? So when you are deciding how to monitor, because now you are the resource person, the teacher doesn't have anything to do with that. The teacher's role was to compile data and to do this and to do that, and observe the child and write down and register what he was been doing. And so all that information was the basis for you to decide, yeah, this is where to put a referral, or maybe you say, well, you know, this is not enough material for me to decide if we want to refer this child to special ed. Does that make sense?
So, Rose, what you're talking about here, these are all the protocols to gather the data to make the decision whether or not the kid is being referred to special ed, right?
Yeah, so the first
So
part.
this is like the RTI part piece.
It's a little bit different with RTI, but it's again, yeah, because what RTI does is to include all the children in the process. So at Tier 1, you are teaching to all children. You are the teacher, so you are providing the instruction in different styles or whatever you decide. Now you identify that there are some students that are not getting it, so then you go to more concentrated, and that's Tier 2, more concentrated groups. That's when you work with the small groups. Uh-huh.
I guess where I'm getting a little confused is at your heading says pre-referral, but then, for example, bullet 12 says how those involved collaborate to meet the language and special education related needs. Because the kid hasn't been identified yet here, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. So, because, okay, the process that is taking place is the teacher has a role. Now you have that to the counselor or the resource person, whatever it is. That person is going to analyze all the data that the teacher gave them, and then she will decide if this is eligible or not. Okay, so that is the part of the pre-referral. So that's when the resource person is going to say, okay, yeah, it is necessary to go forward, or no, it's not necessary, then goes back to the teacher and gives them some ideas and say, okay, let's try this. And that's what usually happens. When the resource person receives all that information and they analyze it, say many times they go back to the teacher, say, okay, why don't you try this? And they give them some strategies, some ideas that they can go and see if that child is improving. Because they want to make sure that the monies that they're going to spend and the time they're going to spend in that child is well valued. Does that make sense?
Okay,
So-
so 13 and 14 then is after they've been identified?
Right,
When they start
exactly.
monitoring progress?
Because now, okay, so now I am a teacher, I am a resource person in a school, and I have this little girl, Maria, who is bringing me all this information, and I need to know what is going to be to make an IPE. So, okay, so what am I going to do? Do I have a committee in place? Do I have consider who is going to help me in the language support? So those are all the steps that encompass what we call the pre-referral part. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because you can find many schools that they don't have no one who can monitor the progress in the language part. So when are we going to assess the language? Okay? If the students have arrived and have been in the United States in 1 year, in a year or less, you must provide them to assess them in their native language, because research has shown that there is not enough time for them to understand an assessment in another language. Now, if the student has been in here, has attended school more than 1 year, so 2 or more, then they can be assessed in both languages. Because remember what we said, that sometimes they don't receive any more nurturing of their native language, so their native language goes down while the other language goes up. So you can still have a duplication of information if you analyze or you assess that child in the 2 languages. And of course, for those children who have exited the ELL, the ESL program, the language program, you can assess them in English, but it won't hurt if you assess them in their native language. Why? Because remember, the more proficient they are in their native language, the better they're going to switch to the second language. The easier it's going to be for them. So, and of course, there are some categories that you need to have that you consider a language assessment. Of course, speech language, specific learning disabilities, mental retardation, and so on. Of those things that are necessary in those areas, that if you you suspect that the child has one of those disabilities, you have to go with the assessment of the language as well. Now, what are the recommendations? Okay, use the background information, include the parent interviews. Now you're going to start interviewing the parents, and if the teacher has done that, perfect. That would be a great help. But even if they haven't, as a research person, you have to interview the parents and see if they would accept the services or not. Even some of the assessments, you have to ask permission if the parent approves that you administer that assessment or not. So reports are recommended to be descriptive. Always try to use the team approach. You can have the team formed by of course, the special ed teacher, also by the bilingual or ESL person, the parent, one administrator, and the teacher, the group teacher. So if you have a committee, it's better because when you plan the IPE, it's everybody's responsibility, and everybody will be giving ideas to have a strong IPE.
Rose, what are your experiences? I know in many of our schools and districts, as part of a effective protocol for communicating with parents, they've hired, invested in parent liaisons.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm just wondering, with something as sensitive as this, I wonder, do you have any reports or information regarding how effective it would be for a parent to help facilitate,
Of
you know,
course.
those conversations?
I can give a lot of examples of districts, of schools that have a parent liaison. Is a plus.
It's a
It's
plus?
so important
Yes,
to
okay.
have a parent in there because the parents of your students will identify with that parent.
Right.
And that parent will focus in establishing those relationships that are very hard for the teacher to
Right.
establish, harder for the counselor, and harder for the resource person. So because everybody is so busy, but that parent liaison has a very important role. And there was a time when it was mandatory. It was compulsory to have a parent liaison in one school, in each school. Now with the budget cuts, many schools don't have it because they don't realize the importance about that. But they are very, very important persons in the functioning of all the programs.
Really?
Now, when you place the ELL with exceptional needs, you place it in the support language program. It is very important that you recognize that acquiring a language is a continuum. So for me, this morning, I learned about Uber because it's a continuum. Every day we learn something and we progress in our language, in our second language acquisition. Just as if you are learning another language, then yeah, you can improve on a daily basis. Okay, and these are some points to close this part. So close collaboration with bilingual or ESL teachers is very important. And if you want to work really hard and help the children, ELLs with exceptional needs, it has to be a combination of efforts from both people. Now, language support services is not an intervention. It cannot be a part of like, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. No, it is helpful, but it's not considered an intervention. It is a Title I requirement. And when it's a requirement, it has not been, you cannot consider it an intervention because intervention refers to those strategies or activities that you do additionally to the specific requirements that the law says. Mm-hmm. Okay, the results of the native language who have not received or have not nurtured their first language anymore. Say, for example, now these kids, like as I mentioned in Carthage, they never received any nurturing in their native language, so they started losing their native language or just not growing, just putting that little plant aside and then nurturing the second language. Well, you have to consider at what level are these kids and what we want to do. Even though if you are going to be talking only about improving or giving them strategies to overcome that disability, you still have to see the benefit of that child having a strong native language. So that will help you and that will help the child in overcoming their disability. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's not only that, okay, it's a requirement, but no, it's like a vitamin. Okay, so, and these are some things that I put together, so maybe that you may want to check to identify children who are GTs but also have a learning disability. These are some specific symptoms. I'm not saying that everybody that has that is a gifted and talented and disabled child, but there are very specific factors that demonstrate that the child might have two of those, the GT and the disability. They usually are very creative, but they are, they have vocabulary, but in one of both languages, but they have poor syntax. So they know a lot of words, but they mix both languages. And not because they are code switching, but because they don't have a good syntax in any of those languages. So they feeling that they don't fit. They have poor social skills. They think that they are different, and if you have seen those GTs, that they will, okay, I am a GT. And many teachers that I was seeing say, I am a GT. No, you're a GT teacher. Hello, not a teacher GT. But yeah, that happens. And then they are very critical with themselves. They are very picky with themselves. They try to be perfectionists.
Rosie, do you have a similar type of list for kids? Because the district asks a lot, when do I know to start doing the evaluation for EL?
Yeah.
Like, to really start looking at, is this a learning disability? Like, obviously, the child is not being progress after 10 years. But
Right.
you don't wait that long.
We went over there in one of the slides, but I can pull it out, yeah. Because, no. Something that I was thinking a little while ago is that maybe a document like the one that we're going to be using tomorrow might be useful so that the teachers have that.
Maybe a guideline of this is when I start thinking
Exactly.
that we have a bigger issue here. Or a different issue.
Right. They don't like to have help. They get angry if you want to help them or if someone else wants to help them. And in the area that they are good, they really like, but they don't try to improve in any other area. Say, for example, they are good in writing, they only want writing. So say, for example, they are good in math, they hate writing, they hate reading, they hate everything. They only want to work all day long in whatever they feel comfortable. That is because they feel very perfectionist, tend to be. And then sometimes they exhibit very bad behavior. So they can, because they have poor social skills, they don't adapt. And if you are working in a team, they don't like to work in teams, especially if they have that belief that they have a giftedness, because in their culture, it is a plus to have a good memory and a good observation skills. Uh-oh, I don't know what I did. Okay. So, some common characteristics that about giftedness, and these I already mentioned. Some having poor, but again, people who is gifted feels that they are not part of this world, that the world is not understanding them. So it is difficult to work with GTs because of that, because in a way, what you do, you usually provide them with more projects, more homework, a more strict curriculum, but because they feel that they are, wow, they don't put attention, so they miss other things that are important in a general way of behavior. So what is missing? Okay, again, we need to provide professional learning opportunities to our teachers so that they can understand the importance of culture, and they can understand the importance of having children who doesn't speak English as their first language. Some characteristics are very specific to different groups. And then, of course, try to have the early intervention strategy so that these kids don't get to third grade and be identified as having a learning disability when they were not in kindergarten or where they went in first grade. So it goes to both sides. In one side, you have that teacher that feels that because they are learning, they cannot have a disability, because they are very confusing. It's really hard to disaggregate the behaviors of both things, and then of those ideas. And then, in the other hand, there still is the belief that children who don't master English are dumb, have low, high intelligence, and they are considered as, no, you don't pertain to the regular classroom. So we need to go with that and then provide professional development as well. So at this time, I would like for you to think, okay, considering your own role in education, try to reflect what would be the next step to improve the services for the ELLs with exceptional needs, both GT, learning disabilities, or GTs with learning disabilities. And then just try to, the three of you, what you can do, and the four of you. So Carol, you can join them, and Carol, you can join the other team. If you want to discuss a little bit about that and what we can learn out from these thoughts.